Nice to have guests, which makes it a little easier than just myself talking for a little bit over a book.
Gotcha.
Alrighty, let's make sure that we're live. And we are. Welcome, everybody, to Prudent Reads number 3. I am joined today by Clossington, and we are discussing Bronze Age Mindset, written by none other than the infamous Bronze Age Pervert. So, to start off, I'll let everyone just come in for a little bit, and I'll tweet that we're live. And, get started.
So you were just saying that you sort of went into Bronze Age Mindset completely blind, other than seeing, I guess, some miscellaneous tweets here and there from, I guess, frogs on the Twitter sphere or Bap himself. Like before getting into the book, like, did you have any sort of impressions of what you were getting into?
I had no idea what I was getting into. I think the only thing that I had the faintest idea of was that it reads as if someone was trying to channel Nietzsche in a 4chan green text shitpost. That was the only thing that I kind of got from tweets that I had seen, whether it's from you or from Bap himself, just between the misspellings, the odd grammar, and just the writing style of it. That's all that I knew. And I didn't want to taint it by reading a review or other people's opinions. So I haven't read or watched a video talking about it. I haven't watched any fellow YouTubers critique or, own book review of it. I wanted to go in completely blind just to see what the experience would be for myself.
Like, to be fair, the review by The American Mind is actually pretty decent at condensing the essence of BAM, Bronze Age Mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It's it does really show, I guess, the sort of Nietzschean sort of undertones that Bap is coming from. Like, he goes out of his way to reference Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Camille Paglia quite a few times.
Oh yeah.
But he also seems to love the pre-Socratics. So Heraclitus, the like ancient Greek philosophers before the Sophists, that had this conception of the world that was fundamentally chaotic. But before, I guess, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, before the great idealists, the ancient Greek philosophers sort of had this vision of the world as constantly shifting. There were no maps. The world is constantly in flux. Like Heraclitus called it flux. The world is like fire. It's always moving. When you're in a boat traveling, trying to navigate the Mediterranean, you don't know where the seas or winds will take you. The world is uncharted, and fundamentally, it's amoral and to a certain extent nihilistic. But you have your band of pirates with you, and you can navigate this sea and kind of conquer it, if not for a very short time. And that's the sort of, I guess, that's the sort of perspective that Bap is coming from. He goes out of his way to support, I guess, pirates, conquistadors, great adventurers, but also, I guess, the most adventurous scientists out there. Like, in his book, he denigrates, I guess, the office nerd. He espouses a very negative view of nerds everywhere. Like, he goes off and says that most of history is just written by monk nerds. So we don't know if centuries were just fabricated. He doesn't like, I guess, the conformity of, I guess, soft office, the soft oppression of office melodrama. Like, he'd hate the atmosphere of like The Office or any other, I guess, banal sort of sitcom, I guess, scenarios. He loves, I guess, extreme hierarchy, extreme forms of aggressive masculinity that is completely focused on serving some cause. It doesn't matter what cause, as long as it's a bunch of guys with a bunch of grugs who are genuinely bonded by some common cause. They know what they're doing. The world is fundamentally chaotic and they have to navigate it. And it's that sort of spirit that leads us to Bronze Age mindset, which the prologue itself says it's not a book of philosophy or theory. It's an exaltation of beauty and, I guess, the pure grug spirit.
And he makes that clear as well, where he's like, this is not a self-help book. This is not a philosophical manifesto, although towards the end he in fact does call it a manifesto.
Yeah, I mean, it's all the things that BAP likes, which includes or likes and dislikes. Like I think he still has this in his Twitter bio, but he is an advocate of nudist nationalism, and he is the enemy of xenoestrogens everywhere. He loves, I guess, he kind of falls into this sort of like homofash sort of subcategory that includes like Mishima, where you love where he loves like the beautiful aesthetics of bodybuilders and strong men everywhere, and hates the inhibitors of xenoestrogens, which are these hormones found in your food that makes you grow man tits and keeps you down, makes you stressed. I think he includes a list of all of the artificial hormones out there that are keeping you down. He includes like serotonin and what was it? I think it was somewhere in part 3.
Yeah, it's in part 3. He mentions serotonin, estrogen, and one other.
Yeah, but he wants to embody pure grug and pure non-conformity. He has this hatred of what he calls owned space that we can probably get into a little bit later.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of the first part 1 of the book. But yeah, so what a fun, for me, it was a fun read because, like I had said, and I think Tweety Bird just mentioned cortisol being the third chemical. But yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, I went in completely blind. And so to me, reading through it, not only did it feel like a very, like there's a through line that I think you kind of were on hitting the nail on the head for, talking about what he likes and what he dislikes. And, even at the beginning, he talks about how this isn't a book of philosophy, but, just an exhortation of what he enjoys. But to me, this read very much like Beyond Good and Evil, in how it is very sectioned off, and there are a lot of self-contained snippets of just very specific ideas, which get referenced throughout the work later on. I did notice in parts 1 and 2 is where it is the most erratic in its writing, where it's very misspelled, very grammatically incorrect. Things are not properly conjugated. It feels like a very poorly translated piece of work through Google Translate. But towards the end, parts 3 and 4, that quickly slides away as he starts idealizing and formulating, his solutions. It was, to me, it was just a very easy read. I mean, I definitely went through it two or three times trying to get through it to understand it and make things a little more clear. But it was it's 190 some odd pages, and it went through rather quickly for me.
Yeah. Just one thing that you mentioned, it's the fact that Bap as a character, if you look up his very fun podcast Caribbean Rhythms, he has this thick generic Slavic accent and or I don't know what you'd call it. The Bap persona misspell or purposefully just butchers grammar
Mm-hmm.
in a very. I mean, it makes everything feel
It's playful.
lighthearted. It's playful, and it's kind of just a testament of his non-conformity. He just doesn't care. I did get the feeling that BAP is what would happen if like some like Russian student, some Russian 4chan troll found the Spoke Zarathustra and just went to town writing his Nietzschean manifesto, or some Russian bodybuilder who frequents pole found the Spoke Zarathustra and just wrote down his erratic thoughts. But it does come off that there's some sort of thesis in here. Even after reading it a couple times, I'm not sure what the thesis is, or in some roundabout way what he's advocating for. But we can get into that a little bit later. But the book itself is divided into a prologue and 4 different parts. And I think you said you wanted to go and start with his actual praxis in part 4, and then work our way backwards.
Yeah,
but we could just start with like the prologue and then go part 4 and then go backwards.
Sounds good to me. I'm all for it.
Yeah. So part 4 is where he actually gets down to, as we discussed before, the prologue is a very short, I guess, explanation of what this book is set out to do. It's meant to be an exhortation of what did he say in like the very first couple sentences?
This is not a book of philosophy. It is an exhortation. I hardly have anything to say to most who aren't like me. Still less do I care about convincing.
Yeah. He also says, the sort of popular zeitgeist is that of, I guess, the DMV, EU bureaucracy. Like he says mole man, but with EU bureaucracy with tiny mole man eyes behind small glasses. But he uses the term, what was it? He calls it yeast life, right?
Yeah.
The yeast that is all around us, the sort of banal, bureaucratic sort of office drone mindset that is everywhere. And the point of Bronze Age mindset is to get you off of that just stress-inducing, repressed, unnatural sort of state of life. And that's, I mean, it's an admirable goal. It's definitely entertaining. And the entire book is fun. And whether you agree with its conclusions or not, you will have a good time reading it. You'll definitely feel like going to the gym afterwards.
Yeah. And he points that out, talking about sort of the yeast thing. He says it in the prologue. He says, most of mankind is the walking dead. That, life has this thing inside of it that it reaches beyond itself, this intergalactic worm. I can't say here, you must wait. But if you don't reach beyond yourself, you are dead. And I think that's what he's sort of talking about, because the prologue discusses just sort of the modernity, I guess, is sort of what he's railing against here, this bureaucratic urban lifestyle that keeps people confined. And he talks about this in part 1.
He doesn't say it's modernity in particular. Like, I think he cites like 1600 BC, where the old Europeans worshipped the fat old lady, and the sort of natural state of the longhouse, where young men are badgered by like fat, gross old women who tell them what to do. And that's just an absurd state of life that no one should be under. He says that it's something like the human norm, to be a young aspiring Chad in this native longhouse being pestered by your elders who just want to keep the status quo. But it takes a sort of amoral idealist to create anything worthwhile and anything beautiful. So that's the prologue.
Yep. And with that, I want to jump to part 4 because he provides sort of a summary of what he thinks he set out to do in this book, or at least his key observations, and I think that that'll be a good jumping point for us to discuss the book in detail as well as what he thinks. So he says, I have to make a restatement now at the end of this brief manifesto. And so the first part I think is important, where he says, many are domestic animals and are happy that way. I speak instead to the men who feel stifled by this bug world.
He loves, I guess, calling people
bugmen.
He loves calling people bugmen and nerds and yeast. He at the end he absolutely denigrates social justice, egalitarianism, any sort of slum life of, I think it was like the slums of the third world. And his solution to this is something like roving bands of pirates, or not pirates, but men with a purpose, and I guess clubs or secret societies or not necessarily secret societies, but men with bonds who create something beautiful out of the yeast.
Indeed, and he mentions Achilles and Patroclus a lot, as well as other famous, male bonds throughout history. And he says that, it is better to go out. And he's just like, why, leave an old body when you can have purpose and adventure, and to live with your friend, to leave behind a beautiful corpse as Patroclus does in the Trojan War.
Yeah, he says, he talks about the evils of the suburbs and the heap of, I think he said something in either part 2 or 3 about cities being just this. He doesn't call it cities not being a hive, because hives are natural, where everyone knows their place, where all the bees know their place and what they need to do, and all have purpose. But cities are just this heap of rotten humanity. It's gross, and it's just this pile, this mass. He also says, he also has this thing against any sort of mass, it's not mass organization that's the problem. It's the fact that it's all just petty bureaucracy, not animated by any particular spirit. It's just kind of this rolling mass, but I don't think this particularly jives with, I guess, return to tradition sort of communalism. Like he dissuades any sort of communitarianism or communalism of any kind, really. He's much more of a sort of, he encapsulates sort of like the old Manifest Destiny ethos, where the cities are gross and crowded and disgusting. You must go to the unowned land and create something beautiful. Or not create something beautiful, but you have to transform the land to what you want it to be. Either that, or go to a far off land and become a pirate, essentially, in the form of some sort of like imperial power, like the conquistadors, or as a conqueror. Or in his podcast, he talks about how I guess early or late colonial like businessmen were kind of like the modern day pirates, or how like if you guys have ever seen the documentary Empires of Dust, I think it's Empire of Dust, where these Chinese companies go into these like third world African countries and essentially raid them. They're pirates of infrastructure. Like I think he talks about how the Civil War was essentially puritanical piracy, where the North raids the South, or something like that.
He mentions that in part 3.
Yeah, part 3. But he likes that he sees life as its most meaningful when there is a challenge and when things are in flux and when certain grugs just get fed up with banality and go forth and find something new on some horizon in some unconquered land somewhere. But the actual specifics don't actually matter. Like he tries to say, I think in part 3, that you really shouldn't have any sort of particular ideology. You should just kind of go out and do it without the ideological codings or any sort of scruples, with any sort of consistency. You just go out and do it. Affirm life for life's own sake. In a very, I forget Nietzsche's term for this, but affirm Nietzsche's term for life affirming actions. But it's Nietzschean through and through.
Yeah. I think the best sort of through line in the description of what he wants people to be, I think, comes out of part 3 when we're talking about the subjugation of sort of the communal DMV life. He says, "You must not misunderstand this. This isn't a self-help book. I can't help you with how to live. No one can. I am merely concerned with the subjection of life and the suffocation of vitality."
I think he also says that the purest expression of the aristocratic spirit is the obese black the obese black TSA lady who oppresses the people that come into contact with her. As funny as it actually sounds, but I don't think he supports any sort of. I don't think he is some sort of elitist, but it's not clear what kind of elitist he is.
No, and the only thing that he makes abundantly clear, I think, in terms of describing what kind of politics that he kind of adheres to, is that he is very adamantly against any sort of argumentation, ethno-nationalism.
No, he's a very ardent individualist.
Indeed.
And he's a relativist of the highest order, where you can't, like, there's this quote, I think in either part 1 or part 2, where he says, like, true atheism is something like, it looks like Stalin or Brezhnev. It does not look like a Presbyterian schoolmarm.
Yeah.
Or that's atheism. Atheism looks like Stalin or Brezhnev, not a schoolmarm. Atheism is just, you do not trust anything. The entire world is in flux. There are no facts. There's just you and your bros, and your fellow grugs are out there on a mission to take and create whatever you want. I think in part 4 he says, or sorry, part 3 or part 4, he says something about he doesn't want to actually construct it. He doesn't want Bronze Age mindset to be a self-help book. He wants it to be a self-destruction book, in a sort of a Fight Club Tyler Durden kind of way, where in order to actually truly be free, you have to burn out any sort of like communitarian attachments. And once you've really lost all of the estrogen that's keeping you down, then you're truly free to create something beautiful. So it's an immoral or amoral message, but I mean it's fun if you're, I guess, coming out of high school or college and you have the whole world in front of you, and you're a young guy, and you say, "Look at all these drones and nerds out there. I can do so much better. I can go out and create something, and I create something out of your own body by becoming something of a bodybuilder or some sort of uber chad that rejects I guess the sort of generic foods of your local grocery store. You only buy meat, and you also reject the banality of office work and drudgery, and you go out and find some place to raid or some place to create. But in a very roundabout way, this kind of reinforces the old liberal like sort of philosophy of the founding fathers that was built on sort of deistic secret societies and sort of neoconservatism, international adventurism. Like, he says somewhere that that people should join the military because you're a spirit looking for a fight, not for any particular reason. Like, you should go to war just because you enjoy it in an Ernst Jünger kind of way. But I don't know. In a sort of roundabout way, he reinforces the status quo just even harder and more chaotically.
The status quo with less bureaucracy.
Well, the status quo, but somehow even more secretive and like I don't think there's anything there are any problems he has a priori with, like, I don't know, like the Bilderberg group or anything like that, other than the fact that he thinks they're so decadent. Like, I remember in an episode of Caribbean Rhythms where he talks about how even like the diet of our elites is plebeian compared to older aristocracies. Like, he talks about I forget which Obama administration dignitary it was who taunted Julian Assange with the fact that I think it was John Podesta who said something like, I can eat lobster risotto and you eat garbage, but he doesn't know that lobster is just this trash animal that isn't even that good, and risotto is just this plebeian food that anyone anywhere can get. Bap also like talked about how Emmanuel Macron is really into lobster, even though it's just this trash creature, trash crustacean, and how I guess the Obamas had this incredibly generic menu when they had dinner parties. It's like, come on, if you're supposed to be aristocrats, don't you want to have like the most expensive and immaculate like aristocratic food out there? Like, you can't even get the proper aristocratic diet down. It's like, how do you want people to look up to you when you're just like anyone else? Like, these are not. He has a problem with secret societies insofar as they're just like the rest of us. He doesn't want our leaders to be just like the rest of us. He wants them to be more.
He mentions that in part 1 where he starts talking about the secret societies. And the one that he mentions that really stuck out with me that I actually looked up was what he called the Dark Ocean Society, or the Genyosha from Japan, as this sort of ultra-nationalist group that worked with other secret societies to infiltrate and overthrow the Qing dynasty in China.
Yeah, he exalts these he loves like red light districts where all sorts of illegal nonsense goes on. Um, like he sees these as like the only free areas in real cities, and it's a true shame if they're ever allowed to be truly shut down. Um, like I like which yeah, it's it's a I think he points to the fact that Japan doesn't truly, I guess, eliminate these areas of like Japan never really gets rid of the yakuza. They just kind of let them do their thing because uh, it's a natural part of society's fabric. It's an exhaust vent for all the crazies and the subversives out there to just channel their energy. Meanwhile, the rest of us are kind of stuck in this yeast life. Um, I think that's the point of that.
Yeah. Which I think provides us a good transition into what he talks about as domesticated or owned space in part one, where we get some of our more memeable quotes from the book, and which makes it so hard because there'll be these really great nuggets of what I would almost say is I don't want to call them profound observations, but rather observations that have been done away in our current sort of what he would call domesticated life in this yeast world. But he brings them back and is almost a counterfactual to what we exist, and he's just like, listen, the a priori observation is that there is the now. The past can easily be fabricated. The news is fake. We have these outlets of society that don't necessarily mean what they intend and do other things from what they say. So you need to stick with you and your fellow frogs and go from there. And try to break free from the domestication and the xenoestrogens in your life, which is where we get the famous chimp meme that we get out of this.
It's chimp in nature never jerks off, but in captivity he does. What does this mean? But what is WAT?
Yeah,
He says, yeah, what mean? He says, in the state of nature, he's too busy, to put plainly. He's concerned with mastering space, solving problem of life in and under trees, mastering what tools he can, mastering social relations, and jockeying for power and status. Deprived of this drive to development and self-increase, he devolves to pointless masturbation in captivity where he senses he is in owned space, and therefore he puts the futility of all of his efforts and all of his actions. And then he goes on to he gives this analogy where he once saw a jaguar in a zoo behind glass, where all of the humans form to like all the humans just gawk and humiliate this majestic animal. And he says that he saw this noble and persistent sadness being everywhere in this zoo, where this great and majestic creature sensed it was in a simulated environment, and that he didn't have the power to actually move or to really live. He said, like, his sadness crushed me, and I will always remember this animal. I never want to see life in this condition. He sees most people who, I guess, work this 9 to 5 lifestyle as being this jaguar in these artificial environments, and it's a life in duress, where nothing is really gained other than just living. He loves the adventurers of history. He loves the Comanche, the Polynesians, the Indo-Aryans, of course, and the Japanese, people who go out and conquer. Like he he particularly exaltates, I think it's the Comanche, who are these just like, I remember reading a book called Empire of the what was it called? It was Empire of the
Empire of
Summer
the
Moon.
Moon, the Summer
Empire of the
Moon.
Summer Moon. It's a very good book.
Yeah,
But,
I own that. It's a really good read.
yeah, where essentially these cavemen from Wyoming fully master horsemanship, and then in about 200 years they go from this absolutely grug kind of caveman existence into becoming these massive roving bands that have effectively conquered all of the southern plains of the US. And that these free and ruthless bands were essentially broken and can never really be rekindled. It's sad. Like, he talks about these sort of Comanche war bands being reduced to reservation alcoholics, being sort of like this jaguar behind the glass in a zoo. Like, he does kind of come off as an outlaw wannabe, but then again, this is an exaltation of, I guess, noble people that do not endorse slavery. Like, he says noble people do not endorse slavery. They're either free or they die out. And he wants to, I guess, preserve the spirit of free piracy.
Well, free piracy and nomadism, like you had mentioned earlier in the stream, that it wasn't necessarily a rail against modernity, but somewhere along like the 1600 BC, beginning to settle down and civilize. Like, he writes, agriculture allowed for a steady food source, an increase in number, and above all, the maintenance of an elite free from these extractions that lived parasitically on the many. But agriculture broke the human animal and domesticated him. Do you understand then what this disenchanted worldview really is?
Yeah, it's because I kind of said at the beginning, he embodies the pre-Socratics, where the world is not like a map. Like, in reality, it's just this fog or it's just whatever you can see around you, and a fog for thousands of miles everywhere else. Like, the world is not known, and it cannot be known, and it's only I guess sort of banal scientists or who create this religion of science and facts to be treated like a religion that really gives, I guess, sort of I'm not sure where I'm going with this. It's, the world is not really known. People really don't know that much, and fundamentally we live in a world of chaos, and to treat anything otherwise is folly. You just have to see through, I guess, you have to see through the lies of structure. I don't know, something like that.
So the next section that he talks about in sort of briefing over his books is, he says, the left realizes that they look weak and lame because they are. They know that they have nothing to offer youth but submission and lectures. They know that they are unsexy and staid. It is the young leftist men that will start lifting and worshiping beauty. They will be forced to leave the left. And to me, I kind of find that funny because it just seems to be one of the most prescient things that he wrote, just because everywhere and their mother, whether it's the Guardian, Slate, the Atlantic, talking about those terrible, pipelines of going to the gym to becoming a right winger.
Yeah, it's because it's the sort of spirit of democracy where everybody owns everything, and therefore no one really owns anything. That sort of mentality really kind of kills the drive of young enterprising men. Like if you go out onto who actually owns who actually owns, I guess, like who actually runs things when you actually go out into the world, who runs certain government municipalities. It's just petty bureaucrats and no one really above them. There aren't any sort of enterprising aristocrats or pirates looking to get anything out of anything. It's just people living 9 to 5, who go home to be pestered by their wives about being so mediocre. Like this sort of spirit of living under just these collective co-ops where everybody is valuable just invalidates, I guess, the life affirming BAP spirit.
And I think the best comparison he makes about what the BAP spirit would look like is that he does this really, what seems to us, right, would be this fantastical story of like, what if Mitt Romney embraced sort of the BAP spirit, where he becomes president and he tells the American people that we are going to go to war with India, and then actually gets on the boat and goes to India, and then takes over and rules and, sleeps with like the president's wife or whatever. And then, the American government doesn't like this. So he flees to Russia and then becomes a prominent advisor to Putin. And then he's kicked out. So he goes to China, learns the language, and becomes a prominent political advisor, only to be hunted down and kicked out. So he goes to Afghanistan and eventually goes down in a hail of bullets fighting American special forces. And he's just like, this is impossible, but we have these figures, these great men of history that, went from place to place that actually did these things. In the same way that Talleyrand would do well under the French Republic, then Napoleon, and then afterwards.
Yeah, he, if I remember correctly, he then goes on to say that the closest thing we have is someone like Trump, who just comes in, just seizes the Republican Party and makes it his own, and rides the zeitgeist into, I guess, this. He becomes a figure of infamy and to a great man sort of idolizer like BAP. He becomes an infamous figure. Like, what would happen if Mitt Romney actually tried to do that? It's impossible. Just logistically, there are too many bureaucratic sort of mechanisms that keep you from doing this. But he says break the mechanism and force your way into these positions. Like he loves, I guess, the underworld, and he loves these sort of figures that do immoral things and break the status quo. But I guess what does that mean for the rest of us? And for, I guess, the rest of us, it doesn't really matter. Like, all that really matters is the glory of a few special people out there. And all you can really do is, or all that most people can really do, is build pirate bands of their own. And to someone who doesn't really have much, or doesn't really have, I guess, these secret societies or fraternal organizations to really support them, the message of BAP is very tempting. Like, what if you really did try and become the Mitt Romney who goes and becomes this international figure? Like, what does that even mean? Like, how does one actually do that? And I don't know. Like, I think I'm just.
He doesn't really offer a path forward. But to me, there's also like a very kind of Henry David Thoreau, Walden kind of, emotion, or at least sentiment throughout the book, because he's offering sort of this escapist idealism of just, there are ways that you can improve. You must find oneself with nature. You must return to that time frame. And it's not even necessarily the memes that we see on Twitter where it's like return to tradition, reject modernity, but return to the roving bands of great men of Genghis Khan, and that nomadism of you and your brothers, your fellow grugs, your fellow frogs. Find your own Patroclus and make do. And even though that's virtually impossible in a world of DMV obese women at the TSA, or in all aspects of our life in this world of human resources that controls things, it's a tempting way to provide an alternative. And Bap makes that kind of clear, I think, in part 3, where he's just discussing that we must create a willing alternative so that the disenchanted men who are reading this, or who might be open to reading this, see a new way forward.
Like in I believe it's in part 3, where he offers up Greek friendship as an alternative, where you and your grug gym bros, you form these friendly bonds, and then go out and commit acts of great heroism. That's, I guess, all that he really offers.
I mean, he says it in part 3. He's just like, the free man is a warrior. Only a man of war is a real man. We must look to the lives and exploits of their inspiration and anticipate with great enthusiasm that such a life will return. I'm afraid that in the end, the examples of ancient men of a strong hand, ancient men of power, will be very discouraging to many of you, because you cannot easily replicate their achievements and power in our time, and also many of you are actually sissies compared to them in your blood. But I think it is good for all of us to remember that we are panty wearers compared to them.
Yeah, he does say it somewhere that the men of old used to ransack cities. Meanwhile, you and your girlfriend enjoy tasteful banter at wine bar.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's giving the sort of Jordan Peterson message of become competent and clean your bedroom, and then form a pirate band.
Clean your room, go to the gym, become a nudist bodybuilder, train for war, and then conquer a local municipality.
That's unironically what he really wants. He doesn't. He says he kind of advocates for political machines, but instead of having like a big fat man run a political machine, like in the sort of American early or the late 19th century sort of American political machines. Instead of doing that, you should become like a demagogic bodybuilder who's uber competent and yet grug at the same time. Like that's what he fundamentally wants. He wants some form of military dictatorship, but of fraternal bands. So Jordan Peterson, but sort of homo-fash LARPing kind of. And if you actually take this, I mean, I don't think you're supposed to take this book. You're supposed to take this book semi-seriously and never literally. Like I remember tweeting out about. I remember tweeting out this quote from Bronze Age Mindset, where it's like, it's a book. It was a quote about how like the steppe nomads of old never really fell into this nihilistic despair of. They never really fell into this nihilistic trap of despair, and never became introspective nihilists. Instead, they just kind of roved around. Meanwhile, Buddha in living in these cities of squalor, he became a nihilist. So he created this step of the mind in becoming the Buddha, and that's what I guess cities are to Bap. Cities are just these hives of slaves with only a few people at the top really being the free nomads of old. I guess that's, and then I remember some people in the comments of my Twitter said, of course, nomads like were introspective and had nihilistic philosophies for themselves. I think the point is supposed to be allegorical, though. Like when you're out and living off the land and living in the wild, you never really question. You never really fall into these existential trappings. I guess that people who are trapped in routine fall into. Like I always see sort of existentialism as a well, like a pit where you never really get out of. Like there's nothing at the bottom of the well of introspection. There's just what you've been Heideggerianly thrown into, essentially.
I think the nomadism part of it, where he talks about it later on. He says, "Listen to what Tacitus says of the ancient Germans. They preferred to win through battle things of life, and considered it mean and petty to work the land and sweat and toil, rather than living by their spears and risking their own blood." And you don't have time for existentialism or nihilism if you're out, potentially on your last day on the battlefield, roaming the lands for conquest.
Yeah, but I think his larger point is that in risking your life, you are affirming your life. It's
embrace adventure.
Yeah, and it's kind of like it's kind of Tyler Durden Fight Club LARP to a certain extent, where of course. Like in the movie Fight Club, Tyler Durden starts driving a car extremely recklessly and quickly along a highway, and asks these two guys in the back seat what they want to do in life. And one guy says paint a painting, and the other says build a house or something like that. And then he gets into a car wreck, and the point is that both of these guys who survive will have an even greater, motivation to really achieve what they want to do. Like Tyler Durden robs some guy at a gas station or whatever, and asks him what he wants to do. The guy says, "Become a veterinarian," and then Tyler Durden just robs him and says, "Get out and do what you want to do. And if you don't do what you want to do, I will kill you." And that sort of pressure to search yourself for what you want to actually become and do it because tomorrow might be your last day. That's sort of lost in the banality of knowing that you will live another day. Like everyone lives in the 21st century. There are no, hard Darwinian factors that naturally weed out non-enterprising people. And
there's no longer the risk of death on our day-to-day, which in turn deprives us of appreciating life. And there's certainly no reason to value it when you know that you're going to wake up and go to the office and go to work and collect your wage packet at the end of the week. That's, to me, this is one of the bigger through lines of the book that he rails against. And I think that there's a lot of truth in that. Until you experience some facet of your own mortality, you don't appreciate what to do with your life and the goals that you want to achieve. And to me, that kind of through line spoke personally to me, because it's just like, well, if you're going to potentially die young, as the great, nomads and pirates of old with their fellow grugs, what life are you truly living? You're now living in that domesticated yeast world of bugmen. Which I don't know what you've gone through in your life, but like, if you've experienced any facet of mortality, kind of like I have recently, you really begin to appreciate those finer sort of escapist ideas from the modern world. You appreciate nature a lot more. You appreciate the care for your body and what you want to do with it.
Well, I don't think escapism is the cope. The real, I guess, meat of, or I guess the real point of this sort of Kierkegaardian realization that life is short and miserable, turn to higher purpose. The point of that is to create, I guess, is to become competent, and to know what you really want, and to actually go out and become a pirate and take it. I mean, I haven't, I guess, personally had to deal with life-threatening conditions, but if I've been in fights before, and I've had my, I guess, personal problems that I've had to confront, but at the end of the day, nothing has really pressed me to become, I guess, a pirate who just takes what he wants. And that's what BAP wants to, like, what BAP wants to really, advocate for is a natural return to the oppressive state of harsh Darwinian conditions by creating something like a Bapian military dictatorship that is insane and invades India for no apparent reason. It comes off as farcical until BAP sits you down and explains that the real farce is yeast life, and that yeast life is not really worth living.
Throughout the book, he definitely talks about the great military leaders of ancient times. And at the end, he sort of, I think, summarizes it perfectly. The superior, like the handsome Alexander, exert an almost magical effect that draws others to them. Some are drawn to higher actions, others to other tasks, but all petty cares are forgotten. There is nothing that needs to be said or elaborated. No need to intellectualize this any more than the natural way of how life should be.
Like, I think the way life, like his description of someone like Alexander, it kind of glosses over the fact that new organizations are always dynamic. Like if you're at like the ground floor of a company or something, like every little move matters and every person matters. And then once you create these massive entities through sheer willpower and luck, eventually things become stagnant. Like Moldbug talks about how the original Manhattan Project was dynamic and innovative, but now how the Department of Energy is just this static yeast-like form of mass. Or you could look at, I guess, Bill Gates or Steve Jobs working out of their garages being these small dynamic pirate bands, and then they become these monolithic hives of banality eventually. Like BAP extols the virtues of the small garage startup. He calls for people to be competent and to actually seize the day and know what they want and actually go for it, but not a nerd way. Like, nerds are bad. Nerds can be viciously conformist unless they accept accept structures like I remember I think it was in part 2 where he talks about how like offices should be extremely harsh and masculine and not feminine and petty. Like everyone should know what they are doing and why. Like everything should be imbued with purpose. No one should fall through the cracks. The organizations should be dynamic if they are meaningful. So the larger point I'm trying to make is that yes, Alexander was indeed very cool, but what happens a couple generations after Alexander? Like his successor states become somewhat stagnant. Like how many Ptolemies do you really need before you need a new startup to shake things up? And I guess that's sort of the natural cycle of all government institutions. But he says, but the spirit of BAP says these are natural sort of cycles. Like the new and dynamic organizations will always be there to replace the old. They just kind of emerge.
Well, reading through it for me, there was a lot of sort of that Carlylean early 19th century sort of the great man in history kind of deal. That dynamism in organizations comes from men who can organize and call to action to others and naturally bring people to their side. And like you had mentioned, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, these guys working out of their garage, and the dynamism of their companies died when these respective men stepped down. Like we see, I mean, now, of course, we look at Bill Gates far more nefariously, but I mean, you go back 30 years to the 1990s and Bill Gates is this ruthless capitalist taking on the American government, fighting antitrust laws. Steve Jobs, despite his sort of hippie, out-stylish look, the black turtleneck, was ruthless in ruling his company and telling his engineers that this is what's going to happen, this is what I'm going to create, this is what I'm going to do. And now those men are gone from their positions of leadership, and those companies now are, you know, yeast-like and filled with bureaucracy. Like Tim Cook doesn't inspire leadership, and you know, the face of Microsoft is this large looming sort of technological, you know, bureaucratic company. There's no real true innovation or dynamism anymore.
Yeah, I guess like the Bappian spirit is the spirit of these young startups. But I think it was actually Moldbug who talked about how like the most competent, I guess, structural organizations in America that get things done are these tech startups. Even if they're these if they're run by these social justice-y types with weird colored hair and gender issues, they're still more competent than these banal congressional organizations that can never seem to get anything done. Like, where's the dynamism at in America? It ain't in Washington D.C. It's in the ghost of it's with Steve Jobs' ghost and his legacy. Like there are no, I guess, great startups in there are no great startups in the American hinterland. There are always these the only great startups that truly embody the Bappian spirit are these, I guess, fringe like aristocrats of the soul in these cities, that these aristocratic spirits just live on top of the masses. And BAP says, you know, go out and become one of them. in a very sort of Ayn Rand kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
Like I always kind of get like this feeling from reading either like Evola or Ayn Rand, and to a lesser extent Jordan Peterson, that that these books aren't really meant for most people, and if you really are reading it, then you should deny that you've ever read it, or if you are reading it, you're probably not one of them. Like people can quote like "ride the tiger" all that they want. It doesn't make you an aristocrat of the soul. Like most people are just kind of normal and have to just pledge themselves to a larger organization, or a large or become a servant of the great man to actually become a part of history. Okay, it's like most people, like almost no one is an Evolian aristocrat of the soul, and no one is one of Ayn Rand's Übermensch, and almost no one is going to go out there and become a really massive bodybuilder. But it's something to aspire towards, and that's enough for me. Like, it's fun escapism, and after reading Bronze Age Mindset, I did get back to the gym for a while, and I did quit the awful office job in search for a better opportunity elsewhere. So I think it's a good message.
I would agree. There's when I ordered it, I bought it, and I was, like I said, I went in blind, but I took my major takeaways from it all is that you should embrace sort of that call to adventure. You should embrace finding actual sort of fraternal Patroclus and Achilles like friends. And like you had mentioned, whether it's like reading The Fountainhead or Evola, you shouldn't admit that you read these things, in part because there are so many out there that will probably chew you out for it, and especially in the kind of political environment that we live in now, being able to be publicly associated with certain groups makes it very difficult to live a day-to-day life and to, scrounge this existence in this kind of world. But I think that there's a fun, adventurous spirit in the book, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to people that actually, that we agree with, instead of people that you're trying to quote-unquote red pill. It is people that are already red-pilled and that should read it anyways, to sort of either reaffirm where they're coming from or to recognize just a different perspective.
Like, it's definitely preaching to a certain crowd. It can definitely be misconstrued into some sort of slacktivism or sort of like farcical, like a farcical personality who's just a NEET in their basement could read Bronze Age Mindset and yes, take it as like a little escapist pill and
not actually do anything.
And not actually do anything. And I think that's what most people will take from this. Just it will come off as a quaint oddity. I mean, it also rubs, or it also goes directly against the sort of trad-cath mentality of communitarianism and devotion to higher causes. Like, this is not a book for, I guess, staunch religious
traditionalists,
trad monarchists who love tradition and hate these dynamic, enterprising enterprising types. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that these sort of tradcath lovers of monarchy are fundamentally at odds with the nature of what things are really like out there. Like, who out there is an actual honest to goodness monarch? Or what does monarchy even look like in the 21st century? What do Aristotelian concepts of ethics actually matter once the illusion has been broken and people now worship science? Like, what does it mean?
Yeah. So to take a look at some of the comments here, right? So leave the office job for what? To go on an adventure to find a fraternity? What the fuck? I don't think you should, like we said at the beginning, this isn't a book that you can take literally, nor you should take 100% seriously. To me, the takeaway though is not to leave your office job, although I think that you should find something that makes you feel more fulfilled in terms of employment. You need to look beyond just the banality of sort of your current existence, because the fact that you're going to wake up and go to work on Monday, and you're going to go to work for the next day and the next day until the weekend hits, and then you're going to do whatever that you normally do on your weekend and then go back to work. There's more to life than that, and that we should sort of embrace that inner nomadic pirate spirit. So I mean, there's a reason why BAP posts things about like bodybuilders, because there's some inherent aesthetically pleasing factor to it, and plus it makes the urbanite leftist, shudder, who doesn't go to the gym and eats products that are processed and feminizing. So it's not that necessarily like, just drop everything and go find a cabin in the woods like Uncle Ted, but like embrace the fact that there is more to life than the current existence that you have. Like, he talks about even when you get a dog like a Jack Russell Terrier and you bring it to your apartment, it will still dig at the floors because there's that inherent, biological, in the blood kind of sense of what it's supposed to do as a dog and what it's supposed to do as a specific breed. And the thing that stuck out the most to me when reading that little section was like that sea shanty trend that was popular a couple of months ago. Like, we live in offices, but we have this like trend going around, especially with Zoomers, about songs people would sing to pass the time while cruising the high seas on boats that didn't guarantee their survival and getting scurvy and dying in battle. And like, there's that spirit that was in with all of us. So seek beyond the banality.
Like, I think there's a Moldbug quote out there that said something along the lines of like, the ideal job for a man is to join a dragon hunting guild, where all you do all day is just hunt dragons with your bros, with your grug bros. And there's nothing more meaningful than going out and slaying dragons and protecting the ones you love, right? Like, with a crew of guys that feel like a real family, rather than I guess the banality of counting beans. So there's just dynamism.
Yeah, the Shrouded Hills says, so basically BAP is a gay man who wants us to be more hedonistic and wants us to live up to his homosexual caricature of masculinity.
Well, BAP has some rather spicy chapters about the gay question.
He has a whole like tirade on what he calls the Queen, talking about how like the reason why homosexuality is far more prevalent is because they recognize that they are domestic, like they're in that domesticated owned space, and that men aren't the men that they used to be, so they shun away from it and they like cling towards like, their mothers. And only then when they're older and they hit puberty do they like cling for the thing that they like, shunted away from as youths, which is masculinity. Like, that's a very spicy take on like the homosexual, specifically the Queen, the more effeminate, stereotypical gay man. I don't necessarily think that it's him living up to a caricature of masculinity or a homosexual caricature of masculinity. I think he's just identifying that what we consider to be like what the bugman, what the leftist considers to be, you know, troglodyte, knuckle dragging, big beefy men is terrible, and so we must pursue becoming what the leftist hates.
Like I think like in that that passage that you described, he also sort of questions what it actually means to be a man living in the 21st century, and how emasculating I guess sort of bugman living is. And he sees this the sort of LGBT culture as a perverse reaction against the straight bugman who is not really living particularly I guess, I mean, I was going to say erotic, because Bap, I think he talks about the Greek god Eros, and how Eros is his favorite Greek god. But I like Bap uses the word sterile a lot to describe, I guess, modern living, and LGBT is a reaction, a perverse reaction against the sterility of what it means to be like masculine and straight nowadays. I think that's what he gets at. He says that Bap says that the sort of natural impulse of the natural impulse for most civilizations is to be against the young and against the beautiful, and it's only a few cultures that actually extol these sort of virtues of youth and dynamism. And whenever those cultures develop, they're always explosive and reactive and worthwhile. But that's Bap.
Yeah.
That's Bap, and you can't. I can see why, like Bap, in posting, like muscled up guys on Twitter, it would make you question his sexuality. But that's just what he does. That's just what he does.
It's a part of the character.
It's a part of the character.
Because half serious, half a very entertaining act. Like today getting prepped for this stream, I started listening to like little snippets of Caribbean rhythms, and I actually have Michael Anton's review of his book next to Bap's response. I figured we'd go over those today. But like, yeah, this thick Slavic, almost, you know, I guess a Slavic's attempt at a Caribbean accent, to me is interesting. Like when his the infamous "My Name Jamal" shtick that he does, like that's perfect. That's the act. Whereas like he had spent like the first like 20 minutes, I think, of that particular session railing on some aspect of globalism before getting into this like story, you know, or that's the line from it all, "My Name Jamal," and it's just it's an act in itself and a character that I think allows you to sort of disassociate from the stuffy, sterile academic politics of today, and almost in this sort of, I almost want to call it an immature adventurism, but I think that there's more to it than that.
Like I'm really. It's an exhortation of, like, Bap is an exhortation of vital virtues. Like it doesn't necessarily matter what, like Bap's docs has been out for a while, but it doesn't really matter what his docs is. The point of Bap, the character, is to be a jester that makes fun of the bugmen, and points to or starts posting examples of the anti-Bugman on Twitter, and this includes the jacked Chad Grug bodybuilder that pisses off leftists. So that's that.
Yeah, he's clearly doing something right. And I mean, the funny thing is like, what was it? Just the other week, the Cant bot doxed him again. And what just followed was, a million different images, almost like I am Spartacus, where everyone else was saying, no, I'm the Bronze Age pervert. And it didn't matter because, even if his dox is already out there, from what we know is that he went to Yale, he studied political science, he's in relatively good shape and good health. And he gets to embrace this character and talk about sort of like the future of like right-wing politics. Like, he is living a far more fulfilled life than any of you bugmen ever could. And I think that is why he's such a good character to rally up behind, is because he knows, at least, even if memetically, how to get under their skin.
Yeah, that's fair enough. The one of the more pressing things about the BAP docs is accusations of, I guess, lived hypocrisy, where his IRL career is at odds with his ideology. But I think that's missing the point of it might be missing the point of Bronze Age mindset, where you have to take Bronze Age mindset semi-seriously and never literally, because it's a jester making a criticism. It's a character, and not necessarily a prescription. It's a character making accusations that the Bugman is weak and gay, and the farcical solution is national nudism. So I think that's a good sort of way of summarizing what like the BAP docs means. Yeah.
So with that, I think I wanted to, like I had said, I went in completely blind until today. So I thought I'd bring up little snippets of Michael Anton's review of BAP's book, and then BAP's response, and then we can sort of wrap up from there. So Let me go share screen so the audience can enjoy it with us. So, I think it was, who said it? That was, Shrouded Hills says, BAP wrote this book when Milo was popular in the dissident right, and it really shows. Well, the book came out in early 2018?
Yeah, I think that was the sort of post-Milo,
post-Charlottesville, because I mean, even Charlottesville gets mentioned in the book itself.
Yeah.
So I don't think necessarily Milo would be the character here I'd be comparing the most.
I'm not sure who you would compare BAP to in terms of what he politically advocates for. I'm really not sure who you can actually compare BAP to. I mean,
in a contemporary sense, I don't know.
I guess, like, maybe. I mean, maybe like if Moldbug became a bodybuilder and stopped being a tech nerd. I guess.
Yeah.
But.
So this is from Michael Anton in the Claremont Review of Books, the summer 2019 edition. And the first thing that I thought was interesting in this little snippet here is that months later, the tech entrepreneur and anti-democracy blogger Curtis Yarvin brought to a small dinner at my home, in lieu of more traditional flowers or wine, a book, one that I had never heard, called The Bronze Age Mindset. So I like that Curtis Yarvin is the one that introduces our critic here to this work. I find that interesting. And Michael Anton and Curtis Yarvin are going to be on Jack Murphy's show, I think, this Friday. And they're going to be debating, I think, about Moldbug's ideas. I think that'll be a good show.
Yeah, I think so. But I think the original person who introduced, I guess, sort of right-wing, the right-wing White House crowd at the time to Bronze Age mindset was Moldbug. And it's this Claremont review, book review, and the American Mind review were really the sort of catalyst for the Bronze Age mindset popularity. Like I'm not entirely familiar with the early development of BAM, but I mean the article itself says that self-published in June 2018. The strange advertising campaign was just a bunch of Instagram models like posting on a beach, on like beaches with copies of Bronze Age Mindset. It's an interesting way of doing things.
Well, I think as we've learned from our friends in the right-wing book publishing, group, that there's a lot to be said about meme marketing, like Rogue Scholar Press and Mystery Grove when they were still on Twitter.
Rest in peace, Mystery Grove.
Oh, Mystery, yeah. F's in the chat, guys, for Mystery Grove Publishing Company. Those guys had mastered the meme game, and I think BAP was sort of the first one to, make that sort of memetic marketing work for self-published and, right-wing books.
What was it called? It's like spicy tacos or something like that.
Delicious tacos.
Delicious tacos. That book came out a little while ago. And there's also what was it called? It was about architecture. It was harassment architecture that also came out. What else is there? Yeah, there are a bunch of good. I guess right-wing small right-wing book publishers out there. Like you mentioned, Mr. Grove Publishing. Was there also like Antelope? What's it called? Like Antelope Publishing, Rogue Scholars,
Imperium Press.
Imperium Press. Countercurrents is always good. I'm trying to think of any other good book publishers out there. That's just about it. Do you want to go over any particular passages in the book review? Review?
I think I'll start here because this is where he finally starts criticizing the book. He says the strongest and easiest objection to make to Bronze Age mindset is that it is racist, anti-Semitic, anti-democratic, and misogynistic and homophobic. And indeed, BAP delights in generalizing. The facts that he generalizes in neutral or positive ways, at least as much as the negative ones, won't matter. In the current year, saying good things about good groups is good, saying bad things about bad groups is good, and saying anything else about anyone else is bad. Yet very little, if anything, BAP says is more outrageous than even the mid-level outrages of Machiavelli or Nietzsche. And most is quite a bit gentler than what he finds in Marx, Lenin, Mao, Said, Guevara, Alinsky, Foucault, or any numbers of fanatics whose creeds are taught in elite universities.
I mean, anti-Semitic, anti-democratic, misogynistic, homophobic. It's like, yeah. I mean,
sure.
Yeah. He does actually advocate for, or he does extol the virtues of some of Gnosticism, particularly Frankism. I think in either part 2 or 3. He loves his secret societies and his weird esoteric Well, he hates on the nerds, but he somehow likes these secret societies that revolt against the demiurge. I don't know, but these accusations of being politically incorrect are, it's yeah.
Yeah, and he goes further. He says, rather than anticipate and litigate each individual charge, we can save time by bumping up a level, since all of BAP's offenses fall under one broad heading about which there can be no question he is sincere. BAP is, as noted, relentlessly hierarchical and emphatically extends to all human beings. The highest theme in Bronze Age mindset is a sustained diatribe against the idea of human equality. And I mean, that's true.
Yeah.
He's incredibly anti-egalitarian. It reminds me a lot. I think it's Aristotle who had mentioned that some men are born with the mindset of a slave.
Yeah, like the whole point of BAP is you and your Grug Chad friends go out, form a pirate band, and then the natural slaves will accumulate around you and sort of populate your pirate adventure. Like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs and their friends will create a company, and then the natural Aristotelian natural slaves will eventually populate it or be drawn to it, or some of the other Grug Chads out there might come along and join the actual oligarchic band. But yeah, I mean, it's fair enough. Anti-egalitarianism is kind of the point.
Yeah. And he says here, Anton continues, he says, the key political questions arising from this natural inequality are, first, how justly to apportion scarce goods among the unequal claims to merit, but the equal claims to common citizenship, and second, who gets to rule. And I mean, I think BAP's, answer has been just that there's that natural will to power, and that if it's not going to be you, then some other band of roving grugs are going to seize power, and that is how we will rule.
Pretty much. It's either another roving band that will rule, or just the natural yeast will just spread over whatever territory is being fought over. Because like the natural state of the world is decay, where the yeast takes over. It's only a roving pirate band of grugs that really shakes things up and has any sort of idealism or dynamism.
Yeah. And so Anson continues. He says, at any rate, let us stipulate for the sake of argument that BAP is right that the natural aristoi are defined not in Jefferson's terms, virtues and talents, but rather more or less, as Machiavelli says, strength of mind, will, or temper combined with physical prowess and endurance. There is much overlap here, to be sure, but there is in Jefferson's writings and in the works of those who informed and inspired him a much more serious concern for the status of morality and for those virtues conducive to stability, prosperity, technical innovation, and the arts and sciences. Yet, however we define virtue, we immediately recognize that such qualities are possessed by degrees. Some people have none, many have at least a little, and few have a great deal. What counts as enough to qualify as one's superior? Even if we can establish the cutoff line, how do we measure the amount? How do we convince those that there's bound to be a lot of them and certain they have the right stuff, but who falls short according to our metric to accept their inferior status with good grace? And to me, I think this is really Anton, I think, is operating within that classical liberal mindset of meritocracy, at least to a degree.
And I think there's a good like BAP passage where he talks about how he talks about Oriental despotism and how like tens of millions of Chinese peasants can just be erased off the face of the earth, but that really doesn't matter in the long run. All that really matters is these big chads that come along and really make history. Like, the natural state of the world is yeast and mediocrity and banality, but what really matters is the success of the few who make history.
And I think this is where Anson makes his, I think, most prominent criticism. He says, one cannot find BAM any principled reason or any reason at all to reject or object to tyranny, or to slavery, serfdom, perpetual peasantry, might makes right, warlordism, gangsterism, bullyism, or any other forms of what religious and philosophic traditions call injustice. The only injustice BAP seems concerned with is the suppression of the higher by the lower. But the lower, or let's be more charitable than BAP and say the common man, will always be around. God must love the common people, Abraham Lincoln is to have said. He's made so many of them. What is their place in BAP's moral universe? He seems to reject out of hand the existence of the common good shared by the ordinary and exceptional, and the possibility of a regime in which the just claims of both can be, if not fully honored, at least balanced and reconciled.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. It's like, what is a normal person supposed to do after reading Ayn Rand's Foundation? I mean, pity with this, or like just collapse in despair because they will never be an Übermensch, or submit to the rule of someone they perceive to be an Übermensch. I mean, this is just I mean, it's a good criticism. It's like, okay, BAP, you destroyed virtue ethics. Now what? Like, how are we supposed to live? We can't exactly all live in nomadic pirate bands, unless we find like a wilderness somewhere to send, yes, the Grugs to settle in the middle of nowhere. I think on Twitter, BAP has a policy where he doesn't message back people who are ugly, or something like that.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But it's like, why would he want to?
Yeah, why bother?
I mean, his persona is supposed to be like a Chad bodybuilder. So why would he want to talk to nerd journalists ever?
Or fellow people who
only slander him. So yeah, he's an elitist. So either submit to the frog overlord or get out. But I mean, I think it's a fair criticism that perpetual peasantry is not particularly fun for most people, and the yeast will only get pissed off and fight back against the Bapian elitist in like a sort of French Revolution sort of reaction.
Which I think brings us to BAP's response. And let me go pull that up.
I actually haven't read BAP's response to Michael Anton.
Well, here we go. It'll be fun for all of us. Alrighty. The chat is wondering when you're ever going to post a video again.
Good question. I mean, I actually have the script for IQ Shredders 2. It's about 35 pages long. I was thinking about just posting it on a Substack at some point. I don't know. I don't really have the. I have all of these scripts laying around, but I just never feel like going through the arduous process of actually recording my own voice and then editing out all of the breaths that I make. I absolutely hate like the sound of my own voice and editing audio.
Same. I can't stand it. And what makes matters worse is that I try to put out content regularly, and the fact that I do have to edit it or retake something and then have to listen to it again is infuriating to myself. So I can definitely relate.
Yeah.
But I feel like it, for me at least, because I love the writing part of it, and my writing process is rather wonky because I'll handwrite things first on a notebook so I can sort of get my thoughts out there and then edit when I transcribe it onto a computer. But for some reason, I feel like just the recording and putting out a video is easier than putting it out on, say, Substack or Minds.
Yeah. I mean, would you mind if I shared my screen for a second?
Oh, sure. Let me go. Go for it.
1 second. All right, I'm gonna get like an infinite screen. All right. So, just to give the audience a little taste of what I had planned out for IQ2. Where is it?
Let me go add. There we go.
Yeah, I actually 35 pages, and it actually does start out with the notorious BAP quote. So yeah, yes, it is ready. I just need to actually produce it. Yeah. So what is the actual BAP refutation of Michael Anton?
So here we go. So he thanks the American Mind and Claremont for the opportunity to reply. So the question is about the alt-right, because Anton spends the first maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs trying to define what the alt-right really means. And so there's a lot where he talks about the Straussians, which to me reminds me a lot of Peter Thiel's essay in like 2007, The Straussian Moment. But here we go. So I want to emphasize one thing here in my response. I must correct the impression that Anton gives in his review, flattering to myself though it may be, that the Bronze Age Pervert is the engine of the online disturbances that have been loosely called the alt-right since 2015. In some sense, I feel bad because my book has made it easy for Anton and the audience of Claremont and others who are mainstream and traditional conservatives to try and cordon off this phenomenon into one that is easier for them to understand, that of right-wing nihilism or the return of Nietzscheism.
I mean, like, I wouldn't say like BAP would be at home with the old alt-right of 2015, 2016. I don't think he would have been, I guess, properly. I don't think he would have been embraced by that crowd at the time. Like, BAP has a very, like, his sort of style is very, I guess, similar to that of like Jonathan Bowden, perhaps. I mean, his love of Heraclitus is shared with Jonathan Bowden, and his sort of pagan immoralism or amoralism is shared with Bowden. But he doesn't have the sort of noblesse oblige that Bowden sort of espoused. And Strauss. Like, Strauss is
I think he's referring to Leo Strauss.
Can you hear me?
No, you cut out there for a second.
I'm sorry. He's talking about Leo Strauss, the neoconservative philosopher. I mean, BAP, his docs suggest that he is something of a neoconservative or Straussian. So, I mean, Strauss is. I haven't actually read his work, but I have seen, I guess, summations of his work. where he's something of an eclectic writer who does apologetics for I guess like liberalism and I don't know. Most modern conservatives have been touched by Strauss's work. Where is it? But to get on to I guess Bap's refutation of these two book reviews, I think it's strange that he posted this review without including any of the trademark Bap jargon, or not jargon, his weird semantic style. Like and when Bap goes on to, I guess, other people's streams or when he's being interviewed, he keeps the accent, but he I guess cleans it up, and he sometimes does apologetics for, I guess, accusations of bigotry. Like I forget which interview he did when he said don't tell women to go back into the kitchen because that would be illiberal.
I think that was his interview with Jack Murphy a year ago.
Yeah, I think so. But
he continues on talking about the term alt-right. He says it doesn't exist and has nothing to do with media representations of it. It attempts to define it and control it as a form of white nationalism and skinheads, the various public figures they've tried to anoint as its leaders, only to make them ridiculous and tear them down, or even, here is what is crucial to understand, just white males or just the right wing. The same phenomenon is taking place on the left, and there's much more crossover than older people realize. There is much more involvement by non-white youth, particularly Latino, Asian, and multiracial youth, in this phenomenon than people want to admit. I'm not saying this is to run away from the charge of racism, but try to show you that you can't and won't be able to contain what is happening now by typecasting it as an angry young white male thing. That is wishful thinking on your part if you believe it.
I mean, I don't think it's particularly useful to just dismiss Bap for, I guess, using or to dismiss Bap as being just a skinhead bigot. Like, there's a lot more to it than that, and I think a lot of, I guess, non-white male guys that have read Bronze Age Mindset will attest that it's the real thing. It's an exhortation of being strong and being a pirate, and not some, I guess, vacuum of nihilistic relativism or whatever the accusation would be.
Well, primarily right-wing nihilism.
I've seen guys from Turkey or India and in other places read BAM and really enjoy it, even though Bronze Age Mindset calls Indians ugly. He said something about centuries of he says Tagalong is one of the most insufferable languages out there, and their Indians are ugly and inbred. But if you find, it's hey, the original readers of Nietzsche, in spite of Nietzsche's anti-Semitism that you'll see you'd see in shoot, I forget which one it was. In spite of
homo.
Yeah, in spite of Nietzsche's kind of anti-Semitism, a lot of his original audience was Jewish and actually really liked him for some reason or another. BAM exalts the beautiful and the strong, and anyone of any ethnicity can really kind of respect that, I guess.
Yeah.
The more you disrespect Indians, the more they love you. Yeah, that's just about right. Are there any actual good criticisms of BAM? Or
I think the only good criticism that I think I found, because I was perusing YouTube today, like I had said, because I haven't read anyone else's stuff except maybe these 2 reviews. But I know on YouTube, I know that Keith Woods made a video about a year ago saying that like the Bronze Age mindset won't save us. So I'm very interested to hear what Keith has to say. But other than that, I'm not familiar with too many prominent criticisms of BAM other than the repeated attempts to dox him and call him a hypocrite.
Yeah, I mean, you could accuse it of, I guess, being either being completely vacuous and just advocating for petty criminality, or you could accuse it of being a crypto apologetic, doing crypto apologetics for neoconservative, like foreign interventionism, or something like that, or being just pure escapism. I guess those are good criticisms. People also just ad hominem ad hominem BAP as just being pure LARP. Yeah. But then BAP will say, post physique, and ad hominem you back. So it's like, it's not a decent. There aren't too many like book reviews out there that do these criticisms. The worst that they do is just racist, sexist, anti-egalitarian.
Yeah,
like, whatever.
And so like in BAM's response, or BAP's response to a lot of what Anton says, is that the current form of the conservative right-wing establishment, whether it's the American Mind, the Claremont Institute, or the what we see in the Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney types, is that you are now seeing that radical racial identitarianism becoming mainstream on the left. And I have it on screen where he's just sort of highlighting a lot of the anti-white tirades that have recently come out of the left. And he's just like, listen, like, you are seeing an organic response to what has come out of the left, like to try and slander it and then not address the problems that are coming from the left, is talking about, Michelle Goldberg's eliminationist title, "We Can Replace Them," ostensibly against whites' nationalism, but is in fact directed at the demographic white majority as such, which the author seeks to replace with non-whites for what she imagines to be a political advantage. And he's just simply saying, like, listen, what you're seeing is an organic response, and slandering it isn't going to help you or to generate a meaningful organizational response to what we're seeing from the left.
I mean, that's fair enough. That's pure. That's just correct. If you increase, I guess, if you are an advocate of racial identitarianism for all groups except one, and then you get mad when that one starts practicing it or starts advocating for it in, I guess, in very unorganized ways. Like I'm talking about the development of the alt-right in 2015. Mm-hmm. How can you want to increase racial identitarianism by posting inflammatory articles, about the nature of the Rainbow Coalition of Barack Obama, and then not expect any sort of retort beyond just, we're going to take it, or it's a good thing? It's sweeping the issue under the rug.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Conscious Caracol had put out that tweet a couple of days ago, or I think it was last week, but it was just like, hey Siri, when did like critical race theory become popular? And it was like next to this graph of when racism starts getting mentioned, and it's all after that post-2008 financial crisis, when at the post-Occupy movement, post-2012 era of American politics, which has now been exported globally. But I mean, that's when it starts, right? You have the Rainbow Coalition, you have the emerging Democratic majority white paper, and the alt-right 2015 timeframe is really just the organic response to exactly that.
Yeah. What does BAP say about this? Is it just
well, he talks about how that the right has enabled it simply because you've got, Marco Rubio's advisors, arguing about the leftist style or objecting to it. Long before there was significant alt-right Pepe anti-Semitism or trolling of neocons of Jennifer Rubin, Max Boot, or Bill Kristol, all supposedly on the right, engaged in vile racial language, rednecks, etc., to describe Trump supporters. Little is remembered when John McCain is slandering his own constituents in Arizona in the most vulgar terms, which preceded Trump's rhetorical reprisals.
Yeah, I mean, you could say something about, I guess, neoconservatives having no vision of the domestic policy, and I see this very commonly in just regular normie cons from my college campus days, where they have no problem talking about foreign policy, and then as soon as what should actually be done on American soil, whenever those questions come up, they have no real praxis other than freedom, which just means default to global homo big corporations. There's just no idealism among the neocons about what to do domestically, but internationally, support a certain tribal country in the Middle East is just the default, position.
And BAP himself says the internet, in providing a space for thought and speech outside the tightly controlled and fake media and the academic machine, has provided the positive cause. These thoughts and words extend well beyond Bronze Age Pervert or my book and would exist regardless. But Anton chose to review this counterculture in the context of my work, and insofar as he addresses the content of my book and my intention, I find it to be in large part a good and fair review. If I would have emphasized anything else to people who had never heard of my book, it is that it deals with a large range of topics from history to literature to my own personal experiences. It is a book written primarily for fun and entertainment. It's not a philosophical treatise. It's not a political manifesto. I wrote it in the mood of revelry and laughter, these being sentiments principally to be found also in the phenomenon of dissent that Anton seeks to understand.
I mean, that's a great summation of what Bronze Age Mindset is meant to be. He does call it a manifesto at the end, but it's just an exaltation of, beauty, youth, and dynamism. And as a fun collection of anecdotes and stories and fun miscellaneous anecdotes, and hypotheticals. The idea of the story of Mitt Romney is fun.
Yeah.
And you will have a great time reading it if you don't take it too seriously or or literally at all. It's you don't go on to you don't go into Bronze Age. You don't read Bronze Age Mindset to find the solution to all of your personal or larger political ills. You go into it to see. You go into it to find some sort of ideal to strive for.
Yeah, and I mean, in response to his critique of being anti-egalitarian, BAP says, if I read him right, it seems that the American regime is the best, especially that conceived by the founders. He may or may not be right, but he should admit that this form of government would today be called white supremacism or white nationalism, or as Lincoln's later revision of it, as would indeed America of FDR and Truman, and not to speak of Theodore Roosevelt. Regardless, even if the reestablishment of America of the 1970s or 80s is less likely than the conservative intellectuals think. The problem Anton and other conservatives must face that isn't my audience or the youth in question that doesn't accept the principles of the American founding, but that the left and thereby a larger part of the establishment rejected these principles long ago. The left has been saying exactly what they plan to do for decades. They want to destroy your country, instill a death wish in the white population, set majorities against market-dominant minorities, atomize everyone, the British plan in Malaysia and a few other places, but now applied domestically within a country.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that was like that was the original, I guess it would be an anachronism to call it the dissident right, but the larger NRX crowd of like 2010, I guess, like that's what you'd say. That's what I'd call the original grievances that the original NRX had in like 2010. And they're still like these criticisms are still around, but most normie cons cannot really see those grievances. And when they do address those grievances, they default to like a 1960s like Kennedy liberalism sort of default to say that sort of classical liberal equality under the law means that these issues can either be swept under the rug as the government gives a hands-off. The government does not say anything about it. Equality under the law, like demographics do not matter. Identitarianism is a priori illiberal or a bad thing. And that even discussing it is a moral sin. So I mean,
Moldbug has kind of returned to that recently with his Clear Pill essays talking about the two-story state.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like Moldbug has been rather like hit or miss over like the last year on Substack, but I mean, I highly recommend reading the four-stroke regime essays.
But then BAP continues. He says, the left completely abandoned Americanism in the 1960s. At this point, they've abandoned biological reality. Vitalism is all that is left against their demented biological Leninism, encouraging health, normality, and physical nobility against their celebration of deformity, obesity, and sexual catamitism must be one of basic functions of conservatism in our time. It is one of the reasons my message is as powerful among many who are fed up with the left's gospel of wretchedness. What is your plan to take it on?
I mean, we could talk about how like the left abandoned Americanism in the 1960s. I mean, that's debatable. Like
I'd say it's much earlier.
Like you could talk about, I'd cite like Americanism coming into its own, like from say the 1860s, 1880s, and then really solidifying in the 1920s. Like that's the sort of era of emerging American nationalism, and then there was a sort of incubation period where Americanism really thrived from the 20s until the 60s, and then it was sort of abolished with the new left. Yeah, I mean that I'd give that sort of story for the evolution of Americanism.
Yeah, that could be a whole other conversation in itself. But I think the real thing is that the question that he asks at the end is, what is your plan to take that on? And I think to me that's been the greatest concern about a lot of right-wing discourse is that there isn't a sort of straightforward or organized, cohesive plan as to what is, the alternative. And I mean, I am sort of guilty of this because I tell people that you need to provide your own personal alternative to what exists. Like you need to be a good neighbor. You need to, be invested in your children's lives and go to, parent teacher conferences and go to city hall meetings. Like, you need to exhibit yourself as this paragon of what you believe to be a right person. But structurally and even institutionally, that's a whole different ball game. And of course, if you buy into, say, Moldbug's, idea of the cathedral, then it gets a lot harder to try and, either go for entryism or some other alternative.
Like, I guess a great critique of Bronze Age mindset would be the fact that it doesn't actually provide a framework for confronting institutional issues other than exit. Exit being Nick Land's idea of essentially voting with your feet, where your actual revealed preferences are fully on display. If you don't like an area, instead of if you don't like the politics of an area, you leave. All choice, no voice. You do not have a voice in politics. You simply choose with your actions what you want or what you prefer. This is the alternative to the dialectic. Instead of going through internal political struggles with your countrymen through politics, instead of interacting through debate, you actually just get up and leave and do your own thing. Like that's very much like the Anglo way of doing politics, right?
Yeah.
But it's a much more American way of doing politics. Like, if you don't like what's going on in one county or one state, you get up and move, or you split the governing municipalities depending on who wants what.
The question I think that has really emerged lately has been, is exit still possible? And I mean, geographically, right? Sure, you can move to a red state, but eventually they will come for you. Like, we're already seeing in the news today, they were talking about the Biden administration awarding, I think, like an $86 million contract to airline companies so they can move people into the north. So, like, in the plains states like Kansas and Nebraska to, blew up those red areas.
I mean, the problem is, what are you gonna do? Like, build your own country with its own infrastructure and its own banking system and its own social media platforms that are run on their own servers.
Peter Thiel thinks so.
It's like it's like, how can you actually do anything how can you actually engage in any sort of meaningful politics completely off the grid? And I don't think most people are capable of actually doing what the Amish do. Or, like, no one actually wants to do what the Amish do. And, like, there's the problem that you said of just, if you live off the grid eventually, like you might not care about politics, but politics sure as hell cares about you, especially when you are effectively the serf that is sublimated to the larger will of the political entity.
Exactly. There's no getting yourself a nice cabin in Montana and escaping the modern world as a certain Uncle Ted did.
Like, eventually the logging companies will come after you.
Yeah, there is no exit, and Charlemagne's latest video, I think, summarized that perfectly.
Yeah, like, the ideal is having thousands of micro states that you can actually choose to be part of.
I mean, that's the basic foundation of the
NRX.
Yeah, neo-cameralist.
Yeah, and the same as like Hoppian covenant communities, but that's pretty much.
It's all on paper.
That's all on paper. Like in practice, what are you gonna do against the Leviathan? Of course, there's always the fash the fash solution of take control of it and make it your own. But I mean that's a whole other topic, and it's a whole lot of toxic cans of worms.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to host a stream with you and a few others to discuss the idea of exit, but like, MK Ultra Victim asks, is the Benedict option still feasible? And the answer to that is no. The Benedict option is really nice on paper, but again, it ignores the fact that the regime wants you subjugated. You can't simply just disengage.
Yeah, like I feel like just about every time I go onto Telegram to talk to a distributist, he always starts. He always ends up with he always ends up in the problem of the Benedict option and just arguing that it's just not feasible, and then talking about how it's almost impossible to actually engage in politics once you've rejected the Benedict option. So, I mean, at least now you have your parameters. So,
I mean, the closest thing I can think of, right, would be say it is feasible, and you engage, and so en masse, a couple 100,000 or even like a couple million people they go somewhere, the plains of Wyoming, like outside of Jackson, and this is where they go. And what I would immediately see happen is you are now in the 1870s, where the American government will be firing upon like Mormon settlers out in the plains, and they would have no problem treating you as a hostile domestic threat.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of a state is that it does not agree with or it does not disagree with itself on the fundamentals, and if it does, then it's not a truly sovereign state in a sort of Carl Schmitt way. Like Academic Agent did a good video on friend enemy distinctions, where if you live in a country, there's a sort of cultural consensus within the Overton window. You're allowed to argue within the sort of framework, but you're not really enemies. Like you can argue about like tax policy, but you can't talk about abolishing all taxation. And once some people start talking about the extremes, or once the two opposing tribes become too different, then you will end up with political conflict. But I don't think that's even like truly possible in America. Like things are it's just too crazy.
Well, that, and I mean, even if it gets to that point, which I think we're getting closer and closer, I think just as we grow increasingly divided lives, we live in different economies, we live in different cultural institutions, there's no way that the current apparatus of the American government will allow it to happen, because the entire global order, at least for now, is ruled by that apparatus. Because you have global trade routes, you have nuclear weapons. Like, they're not going to allow the balkanization with one of the most armed and most nuclear armed states in the world.
I don't think that's actually true. Like I think things have actually become much more centralized due to big tech. Like everything runs off of big tech infrastructure, and there aren't actual like localized. There's no localized infrastructure to replace, I guess, Silicon Valley dominant big tech. And once you flip that switch off, like there's no organic community on the ground to actually. There's no political community on the ground, and there is no real alternative. It's like, sorry, revolutionary treadcasts. There's not going to be a monarchy there's not going to be a monarchy set up anywhere in the U.S. anytime soon. Like there's just the infrastructure just doesn't exist. Like everything is completely integrated. I just don't see like Tim Pool civil war mongering being anything more than
a LARP.
But anything more than a LARP. And the closest that it's come to is what Boldbug called fishing the Rubicon, where Trump just marches
impotently
up,
tweets
about civil war, but then never actually does it. So you might get a couple. He might personally profit off of a couple tasty fish, but dude dressed up as Viking sitting behind the Rubicon will just look at the Rubicon and see that it's not that shallow, and so him and a couple hooligans might cross it. And now there's like a sign in front of the Rubicon now that says radioactive, do not fish. And now no one's allowed near the Rubicon. That's Moldbug's analogy to the Capitol, incident.
But yeah, I think that's a valid criticism though of BAM, is just that he talks about the desire to organize politically, like, be like Sebastian Kurz in Austria, or be like Trump or Bolsonaro. But I mean, of course, this was written in 2018. I mean, hindsight, I think, tells us that I think that the apparatus is way too strong. I mean, we have Time magazine openly, bragging about what they did to fortify things. It is demonstrative, I think, to a lot of people, that sort of the NRX criticism that, the traditional method of engagement is not viable.
I mean, as an alternative, I mean, hey, I'll take the Free Cities project where the ANCAPs build their own private cities in Honduras and in Brazil, and have their own like little Ancapistan free trade zones with private infrastructure. And hey, I'm up for it. If you guys are. But internally, Waco and Ruby Ridge, that's what do you got to do with your pirate band when the feds or when the ATF accuses you of selling illegal firearms?
And it won't be like Waco or Ruby Ridge in the 21st century. It'll be
it's a lot more boring.
Not even that. It'll be a lot more boring. But I mean, they'll just freeze your bank account with Chase Bank, and they'll get a FISA warrant, and then they'll probably drone you. Like,
it's like what are you going to do? Chase Bank canceling your credit cards is exactly what happened to the Proud Boys and to Patriotic Alternative. If you get too edgy, you won't be able to do anything in business. So there's the Bappian strategy of hiding your power levels and denying that you've ever read BAP. But at that point, like, what are you actually standing for?
Yeah, how can you provide a meaningful alternative if you can't even say that you've read the thinkers of that alternative?
Yeah. So I guess that's the problem.
The fundamental problem is that I think that the diagnosis has been made, but there is no available cure.
I mean, I guess the BAP or Spenglerian sort of conclusion that these are just natural processes, and alternative systems will naturally emerge over time. That's a great, I guess, way of absolving yourself of any responsibility and then just doing what you want to do within the bounds of the system. The clear pill. But hey, some of us need at least a little bit of opaqueness. Like especially if you are like the young man reading Bronze Age Mindset and you want to become a pirate, but then you're told if you want to become a pirate, don't do pirate things. So yeah, that's the problem.
And that's where we're at. And I think that's a good place to conclude. Yeah.
I wouldn't ever dissuade people from reading Bronze Age Mindset.
No, you should read it.
Definitely read it.
Read it, and if you're okay with oddly spelled shit posts but also prominent political insight, because I think that BAP also kind of recognizes that you kind of have to work within the system, because he put out the who is it, Ricky Vaughn, the guy that got arrested for all those 2016 election memes and is currently being prosecuted. Like, he's an advocate for legal defense and, contributing to legal defense funds. So, I mean, you should read the book and you should follow BAP, because his insight is prescient on a lot of issues, even if 2020 has given us some hindsight. But you should read the book. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, read BAM, follow BAP, go to gym, become pirate.
Don't be a bugman.
Don't be a bugman. That's
avoid the yeast.
Avoid the yeast. Yeah, it's great advice.
Yeah, embrace the spirit of the book is what I can say. Don't take it literally, but embrace it in spirit.
Like in practice, it's like it's very similar to Jordan Peterson's philosophy, but a little bit more meat to it, and a lot spicier. And it has a whole lot more fun pop history anecdotes than anything Jordan Peterson would offer.
Yeah, you're going to learn a lot reading this book, and you're going to learn a lot of obscure history. You'll learn a lot. Especially if you're a guy that likes to research and enjoys history, there's a lot of pop history, but things that are not well known in the traditional historical lexicon.
Yeah, that's fair enough. If you want Nietzsche minus the Nietzsche minus the pause, or any hint of pause, BAM is your book.
But yeah, thanks for coming on, Clossington. I really appreciated that you took the time out of your day. I know it was about 2.5 hours, so I thank you for it. I'm glad. I'm always happier. I know these streams go a lot better when we have guests on to discuss the book, and it's not just me reading it and having pictures of frogs on in the background.
Yeah, what is it with the frogs in the background?
Oh,
is it just because frogs, Bronze Age Pervert's community is collectively called frogs? Or
sure, but also because it's also kind of partially inspired by Louis Leval putting out his anime girls when he does his newscast streams and whatnot. I'm for a little more. I'm not gonna put up that, but I'll definitely put up a frog. For me, they just trigger a dopamine response. So like the meme with the monkey where it's like neuron activation. I just see a frog and I'm like, yeah, that's what it does for me.
Oh shoot! I think I might have been suspended from Twitter again.
No.
Oh
God, no. Hold on, let's find
Again.
out.
Again.
Hold on. Let's find out. No account suspended. Oh. Oh. What did they say why?
I haven't seen. I haven't taken a look at it yet.
Well, let me go screen cap this, and I'm gonna go let everybody know.
Oh.
Well, okay. With that being said, do you mind telling us how we can follow you and get a hold of you? Do you have a Telegram?
I do have a Telegram.
Do you want to link it in the chat?
Like I'm mostly on I'm mostly on Distributus Telegram. This is just so disappointing. It's like I can't even like. Sad.
This stream took a depressing turn.
All right. Well, I need to recover. This is. I'm triggered.
Oh. Well.
Need to go to gym.
Go to gym. Go avoid the bugman. Go to the gym. But thank you for coming on. It's a shame that it ended on such a bad note. But thanks for coming on, and those of you in the chat, our fellow frogs. We'll see you all next time. I'm gonna go fishing now, and I'm gonna record some footage so I can do a debate after action report, because I was on Apostolic Majesty's debate stream, and that was a fun time.
Yeah, go fishing.
Yep, and then you go to the gym.
Yeah.
All right, guys, you take care. Thanks so much. Bye.